Hi everybody, this is Sayer G and I am the founder of Green Med Info, and today's course is on the healing power of turmeric. This is, without a doubt, my favorite herb for a number of reasons, one of which is that I probably owe my relatively good health today to this particular spice because for so many years I was in front of an LCD screen like this and exposing myself to the synthetic radiation, and I survived somehow because in the first 4 years of Green Med Info I really just was a data gopher. I would go into Medline and search the pubmed.gov database and find all this great research on turmeric, and yet my eyes were starting to suffer. I was working late into the night, and I think it really may have been turmeric that helped to prevent a lot of the damage that probably otherwise would have occurred in my body. So there's something a bit poetic about me doing an e-course on turmeric because I do owe it to a degree much of the insight that I've gathered over the year, as well as for my own personal health. So my experience with turmeric is very personal and yet very sort of meta level intellectual. And what I hope to do in this e-course today is to really give you a sense for really the awe-inspiring nature of this quite affordable, safe, inexpensive, accessible supplement and or food ingredient. So let's get started. First, let's look at the research on turmeric. Of course, many of you know that in today's age, with the internet being the primary source of information that people are now going to get their health information, turmeric comes up everywhere. You see it on your news feed on Facebook, you see it on WebMD, and there's a lot of questions as to, is this research real? Is it maybe supplement companies trying to push an agenda? And then on the other hand, we know there's quite a lot of interest in suppressing natural competitors to rather high-priced pharmaceuticals. So I was in this position myself. I'm a consumer, always have been, of various supplements and food products. I've always been interested in health since very young. Some of you may know my story, which is I was a pretty sick infant, and throughout my adolescence and teen years, I went through quite a lot of healing crises that required some surgeries and medications, including primarily bronchial asthma and inhalers. And it wasn't really until I got to college and started getting deep into the sort of tradition of natural medicine that I discovered that I didn't need the medication, and then in fact through a few dietary modifications, especially eliminating cow's milk for me, I was able to liberate myself from needing any kind of medication. And so many of us get into this field for very personal reasons, and for me, I guess I could say it was sort of a life or death, a necessity for me to figure things out. But on the other hand, I am very subject to being influenced by marketing, and there's always some great new cure or exotic berry or health claim floating around. So what I was so fortunate to have happen to me is that I ended up being introduced to the National Library of Medicine's database, which is of course Medline. It's this massive bibliographic citation database. I think at present there's 25 million citations. And of course that's where I first stumbled on this real gold mine of research on turmeric. So what I want to do is actually switch over to show you, I'll pull it over here on our screen, just the amazing amount of research that has accumulated. So what you see here is this beautiful resource. Now I envision PubMed.gov as sort of like the medical convolution in the global brain that's dedicated, again, just to biological, medical, life sciences research. And why do I say global brain? Because quite literally, it's very much like a brain. The internet connects everybody on the planet, technically, who has access to this database of images and information and research. And it's kind of a miracle because you're actually using light or photons to communicate at speeds that are just devastatingly amazing. So here we have it. Okay, so what I did here is I put in the terms turmeric or curcumin, and you'll see that 10,121 studies have been published on the topic, which is just remarkable. Now you go back here, let's see, when I was a little baby boy, 72, 3 studies published, imagine that. 3 studies when I was born. And now, if you go over to this year already, 375 studies. We just started. I mean, we're still in March. And of course, last year, 1,343 studies published on this topic. What is going on here? It is really amazing what's happening. So when I did my first review of the literature on turmeric and curcumin, this was about 4 years ago, there were only about 5,500 studies. And I took a lot of my time, spare time, going through and looking at all these abstracts. So you can do this, okay? Let me just click on one. Curcumin as a potential therapeutic candidate for Helicobacter pylori associated diseases. H. pylori is, of course, linked to ulcers. I actually had the opportunity to listen to the gentleman who received the Nobel Prize for discovering this connection out in Washington last year. And it's a pretty fascinating application because many people think still curcumin is more for inflammation, and now, of course, there's growing awareness of it for cancer. But it is a powerful anti-infective, and I've written about that when it comes to the CDC's nightmare bacteria, that unfortunately they're now throwing up their arms and saying, we tried every antibiotic we had and nothing works. And at the very moment that they're saying this and basically scaring everybody in the world with a vision of the nightmare bacteria, now curcumin is coming to the forefront. Now, really quick, let me jump ahead here and let's just answer this common question. What is the difference between turmeric and curcumin? Now, curcumin is what makes this beautiful spice, this root of the turmeric plant, golden hued. Okay, that beautiful, rich yellow. In fact, here are some turmeric beads, which is actually from the root that a friend of mine gave me. And in fact, I tried wearing it with a white shirt and found that it stains it with that golden curcumin. It's still in there, and it's almost impossible to get out. And this will be an interesting fact when we talk about how it works in painting the inside of the intestine and preventing things like colon cancer. But this particular substance is only about 3 to 5% of the root by weight. And that's the dry root. So if you took the root, squeezed out all the water, dried it, that powder, if you were to look at that dry weight, 3 to 5% of it is curcumin. Curcumin is without a doubt what most people are focusing on, but we have to remember, and this is a really good principle when we look at basically the healing power of herbs in general and foods in general, which is if you look at any particular plant, turmeric or ginger or pomegranate, you have literally thousands of chemistries in this amazing entity, which is a living organism. If you lift out one of them, like curcumin, which you've identified as being the active principle or the magic monochemical bullet, just like the pharmaceutical model, then you have often made a mistake because really you can't reduce the benefits of the whole to the part. Now, of course, some constituents have different roles and are more potent in things like down-regulating inflammation. And curcumin, without a doubt, is just amazing as far as the research. In fact, this one biomolecule, which is a word I like to use, a lot of people use the word chemicals or phytochemicals. And again, I don't like to get those words mixed up because to me, a chemical is really usually a derivative of a petroleum starter material. That's how I think of chemicals. And of course, with curcumin, that particular element is only one of a background of chemistries. And so here's the principle. Let's say we have an orange. We take out vitamin C, which in this case, chemists would identify as ascorbic acid. What you now have is really more like a chemical and or a drug and not so much like a food any longer. It doesn't mean that ascorbic acid is harmful. As we know, large doses, tens of grams can be even injected for serious conditions, including cancer. But it's not the same thing as the vitamin C activity in the whole food. And my belief, and several other folks out there like Vic Shane, who contributes for us occasionally, who wrote an amazing book on healing with whole foods and sort of this nutritional philosophy, is that when you take the part out of the whole, you actually end up with something that acts more like a chemical, less like a food. So the same applies to turmeric. Now, so what we're going to look here at is we're going to go back to the research, and I just want to show you how many studies have been performed just on curcumin. Look at that, 8,702. It's just mind-blowing. Now, of course, in the past, I've spent hundreds of hours looking at all these abstracts and then indexing them. So that basically, and this is the new version of Green Med Info, which you will probably have available to you very soon, is that we can look for just the research that I've indexed on curcumin. I'm going to throw that in our dashboard search engine. And this was put together by a fellow who used Twitter's open access programming, which is amazing. So look at that. We have on our database right now, Green Med Info database, 1,781 articles on curcumin's benefits. And look at this. 619 diseases have been studied for curcumin, either preventing or mitigating, and in some cases even putting them into remission. This is mainly preclinical research, of course, and we'll talk a little bit later about why there isn't enough human research and why there may never be, actually. And look at this. Amazing. 179 pharmacological actions is what we call them, which is really beneficial actions that have been kind of focused in on. So like reducing inflammation, but how? Oh, downregulating interleukin-6 or inhibiting cyclooxygenase enzymes, which are the ones that your NSAID drugs or even the COX-2 pharmaceutical drugs inhibit, the prescribed ones. Imagine that. One biomolecule in this complex plant able to do 180 different things, all vetted by science. It just blows my mind. So, of course, if we look at the research, again, starting when little Sayer was only a baby, look at that. 1972, 2 studies published. And now we go back here to last 2015, 1,177. So what is going on here? Well, number one is that to me, ancient wisdom, of our ancestors, which by the way helped us get here. You can go to the Ayurvedic tradition, of course, which is one of the most ancient, and you'll find that this substance, turmeric, was considered sacred. In fact, there were symbolisms meshed in with the plant which indicated that it literally shone a compassionate, radiant energy to those who took it. So it sort of conferred a blessing, and it helped to reduce suffering. And we're going to talk a little bit later as to what this may imply. Does a plant have compassion, for example? Does it embody kindness? What is healing? There are a lot of mysteries to be unlocked. But the beauty of it, again, here is look at this sheer density of research available to us today, and then imagine that just a few decades ago didn't exist. Now, let me do this real quick so you can see the power of this free resource, which is a national treasure house, that, of course, my mission at Green Med Info always was to please get this information to as many hands as possible. Don't even worry about going to our site. Go to the direct source. If you have to. We just want people to know about it. So let's do curcumin and let's say breast cancer. Churchman, oh my. Okay, curcumin and breast cancer. Take a look at this. 390 studies performed. That's a lot of research. And of course, what we've done at Green Med Info is to take that research and make it easily available. So here you go. Breast cancer, 79 studies. You can click focus if you're a pro member, and it shoots those all out into a page or a PDF document. So this is part of the power of what we have put together for you and clinicians and people wanting to really practice natural medicine and make it easier. Okay. So I put this image here of the goddess. This is from a temple in China, because when I think of those 159 different beneficial actions, what we call pharmacological actions of curcumin, this golden, radiant principle, and you think about these mythological images of these goddesses with all these hands, implying that they can do all these wonderful things at once. And it's mesmerizing. That's what happened to me. When I was looking at all the research, I'm like, I can't believe this. How is it possible? I mean, pharmaceuticals, for example, generally they're derived from, again, a petroleum substance, and then they disrupt something in the body, causing a certain effect. Those could be called adverse effects or side effects, but they often repackage those side effects into therapeutic ones. Because, again, all drugs that come from synthetic starter ingredients are going to be xenobiotics, meaning foreign to our biology. They're going to disrupt something. But the pharmaceutical industry can't patent, of course, a natural substance, so they have to tinker with it, alter it, and then that's what leads to really the kiss of death of the FDA drug approval, because in order for it to be profitable, it has to have uniqueness, market exclusivity. It then has to be toxic, unfortunately, which is also why about 50% of all drugs that have received FDA drug approval are pulled off the market due to adverse effects, passive post-marketing surveillance side effects before the patent life comes due. To give you a sense for how damaging that is, now think of curcumin. Say you have arthritis and you're starting to take some, reducing your inflammation, and you consider that it may have 100 side benefits or more. It's mind-boggling. It truly is. So what we're seeing here is that science itself, is starting to confirm some of the truths of ancient natural medicine and culture. And I think that what we're seeing, to a degree, is the resurgence of these sort of symbols, like compassion or a goddess energy or an intelligence in nature. This is basically what I think is happening. Okay, so we're going to move forward. Hopefully we covered this well enough for you. So again, don't necessarily be convinced that getting a high-dose curcumin is the answer. By the way, curcumin is very hard to go water soluble. So what happens is that there's a barrier in the liver called the glucuronidation barrier. And in order for curcumin to get through that barrier, it has to usually be connected in some way with a fat or a phospholipid that makes it more fat soluble. So lecithin is an example. Lecithin is that yellowy stuff you see in your egg yolks. One of the reasons why eggs are so beneficial. It emulsifies, so it breaks fats down, makes them more soluble in water. So you'll see a lot of brands on the market. In fact, I have no relationship to any supplement company. That's why I created Agreement Info, in fact, to prevent sort of conflict of interest. I take sometimes Mariva, which is a standardized ingredient which takes lecithin, binds it to the curcumin component of turmeric, and then micronizes it, kind of breaks it into smaller particles. This is believed to get through that barrier in the liver and increase absorption, so it gets into the blood and distributes throughout sort of my more peripheral tissues much more effectively. So that's why curcumin needs to be taken in a certain way, I think, for you to get most of the benefits. And then you have to think about how to get it into the brain, because there's the brain-blood barrier. But here's the other side of it, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the absorption part, is that sometimes you don't want to absorb it all into your body. You want it to just pass through the intestinal tract and therefore help to affect maybe some kind of precancerous lesion in the bowel. So that's why it's always a matter of context, as with everything with natural medicine. It's why we want individualized, personalized information. And that's something that, of course, this is not a webinar for prevention and treatment. This is a webinar to provide information, and that's why you should seek the help of a licensed healthcare professional before you start doing what technically is illegal: prevent, treat, mitigate, cure disease with natural substances. Okay, so the brilliance of turmeric. This is something that really struck me when I started to really go deep into the literature, because what happens is that when you start looking at certain studies, I'm going to pull one over for you on the benefits of turmeric. Some of them are really basic. Okay, this is one on a type of very aggressive cancer known as retinoblastoma. It's like a neurological cancer. The retina and the eye is actually an outgrowth of the brain. So in many ways you could consider the brain a neurological tissue. And in this particular study, what happened is they took curcumin, right? They took a living retinoblastoma cell line in a proper environment, right, where it's still living, and they added just a tiny bit. And what happened was they saw 903 genes downregulated, and then 1,319 genes upregulated. Okay? Now, what does this mean? Well, if you think about it, there's a massive amount of information going on in this transformation, okay? In order to just upregulate one or two genes, something's happening on a molecular level. Something's going on in the nuclear DNA of that cell, and there's something saying, you know what? You need to change the expression of this gene because this substance is telling you to do that. So curcumin becomes a conveyor of immense biological information. For it to be able to alter 2,222 genes, in just one administration, it's basically a way of saying that it has an intelligence to it. See, information is information. It's just ones and zeros pretty much, okay? Intrinsically, until something is selected or an action takes place that has meaning and value, the information is really kind of dead. So for this to happen, what basically it did is it altered that cell's expression from a cancerous phenotype to one that seemed consistent with health. So either there was a regression of cancerous properties, or apoptosis pathways were activated, which is programmed cell death. And that is how you kill cancer naturally and safely, is you wanted to naturally say, you know what, I went astray, I was just trying to replicate infinitely, I could have screwed stuff up, I now know that I'm part of the whole, I have the right information, I'm now going to induce programmed cell death so a new healthy cell can replace me. That's really how cancer treatment works. It's almost like a Zen-like process of the death of the ego. In fact, cancer was colloquially known as proud flesh, almost as if it's some selfish instinct in the ecosystem of the whole. So this is a really important study that always drives me to this awareness that there isn't just, like it's not like a drug. Curcumin doesn't just come in and inhibit a COX-2 enzyme and then does its deal, like ibuprofen would do, or Vioxx. No, not at all. This is altering literally hundreds and hundreds of genes simultaneously in a way that only a massive amount of meaningful information could execute. And that's what I call intelligence. And I think that's a very justifiable definition. So that's why we use the term intelligence to describe turmeric. And generally, turmeric, I believe, helps us understand how almost all foods and all plants that we had a long relationship with, okay? Call it coevolutionary, call it reciprocal altruism, call it plant allies, call it friends. But either way, it indicates that there's been a lot of mutualism, friendship over a long course of time that has woven together two species' destinies. And this will become, I think, more important later when we discuss why it is that turmeric is so healthy. Now, interestingly, a lot of these metaphors become literal because a study was published that really kind of blew my mind. I don't think anyone else has reported on it yet. And just so you know, my secret as far as how I try to stay on the leading edge of the information out there is that this beautiful national treasure house, pubmed.gov, offers you an opportunity to create a free account and set up keywords. So if you're interested in a particular topic, it could be cancer, it could be anything really related to health, you type in the keyword and you'll get auto alerts when new studies come in. And every day, thousands of new studies are published. So it's kind of exciting. We're riding this sort of wave of biomedical and life sciences data. And you have the opportunity to really kind of almost be predictive about what's coming down the pike. If you have an intuition and you think, oh, well, I think coconut oil might become, really good for, a type of cancer. You just type in coconut cancer, put the keyword in, and every day or every week if you like, maybe on Sunday, you can get them to flood your inbox. So that's how I get these studies. So this one came up when it came up with the keyword turmeric. And this study was done using actual turmeric extract and pomegranate extract. And they found that when they applied a certain wavelength of energy to these biomolecules, they emitted an almost pure white light, which led them to believe that these vegetable extracts could be used as alternatives to present-day LED technologies, which use highly toxic metals, things like arsenic, copper, lead, and could ultimately lead to a type of green revolution that really no one's considered. Because right now there's this focus on minimizing energy usage, but using raw materials that are really toxic. And then sometimes they call it embedded energy. So solar panels full of really toxic gunk, takes a lot of fossil fuel energy, even nuclear, to produce them. So, you don't want to necessarily use that approach. What if we could use truly biological, sustainable, regenerative ingredients to produce the next, sort of wave of technologies? And look at that. It turns out turmeric is actually capable of that, and pomegranate. I bet you didn't think you were going to get that in a turmeric lecture, but it's fascinating, isn't it? Now here is, to me, probably the most revolutionary discovery in cancer research of all time. And it's not necessarily that turmeric is the cure, because again, there's different types of cancers in different situations. Cancer has so many causes. It's a multifactorial condition. We're talking from chemical exposures, radiation exposures, emotional factors that lead into affecting adverse physiological responses, nutritional deficiencies, incompatible nutritional profiles. There's a lot going on with cancer. But one thing that is going to revolutionize the field and which is going to lead to a greater appreciation of turmeric is the stem cell theory, which I would rather call the stem cell fact, which is that if you look at any tumor, and they've been doing this over the past decade especially, because this is a relatively new finding, you will find that there's a subpopulation of cells that are the mother cells of the entire colony. So the tumor itself is a stratified and even hierarchically arranged colony of different types of tumor cells. And so the one cell that's capable of creating all the others and actually going and creating new tumors is the stem cell subpopulation. Now this may be only 1 in 1,000 cells in a breast, a lung, or prostate tumor. Those are the ones that are relatively quiescent, meaning they're just kind of sitting there, not a lot of activity, and that's a problem from the perspective of conventional treatment because chemotherapy and radiation only work the way they do. And this is the real conventional, sort of weapons grade chemo that we all know about, which is, mustard gas type of derivatives, as well as radiation, is that they kill the cell when it's dividing. So fast replicating tissue, like hair follicle tissue, which is why you lose your hair so quickly, is in mitosis, so the cell divides, the DNA is exposed, and that's when any chemical or radiation that is exposed to it will cause death. Unless, of course, this cell survives, and then you have this mutation, probably new secondary cancers or more aggressive primary cancers. So that's one of the problems, of course. Whereas the stem cell population is not susceptible to chemo and radiation in that way. In fact, they're enriched, meaning they actually thrive and can be created from non-stem cells. So a daughter cell in a breast tumor that would never turn into an invasive cancer can turn into a stem cell by being exposed to conventional chemo and radiation. So this explains why when the conventional cancer approach is to blast, with basically a warlike mentality, the tissue of question, which by the way may be an overdiagnosed or misdiagnosed benign lesion, which happens with ductal carcinoma in situ as well as high-grade interepithelial prostatic neoplasia, is it? HG-PIN. These are very commonly diagnosed cancers, which actually recently the National Cancer Institute's expert panel identified as no longer being cancer and should be called benign or indolent lesions of epithelial origin. So what's happening is that, what they're doing is they're blasting these lesions with the very thing that enriches the cancer stem cell population, albeit reducing the size of the lesion or tumor. So in other words, chemo radiation can make the tumor or lesion shrink, benign or malignant, and enriches the stem cell population and makes it more aggressive and invasive. And this explains why you'll find there is sort of like this misperception about the effectiveness of conventional treatment. You have a 5-year band of time that they say is the band of time from treatment until another cancer emerges, where basically they say they've cured you. If you don't have a cancer after treatment within 5 years, then they've cured you, right? Well, it takes time for those sort of resilient communities of stem cells to come back, like an antibiotic-resistant infection. You kill the first one, it starts to come back slowly, and then you have a far worse problem on your hand, but the medical establishment writes it off as a new cancer, and they don't identify or take responsibility for the fact that they themselves created this monster, unfortunately. So, the cancer stem cell theory helps us to understand why conventional treatment has failed, and helps us to understand why food and spices and natural substances are so helpful, because they are capable of targeting the very types of cells that cause the original problem. And keep in mind, one of the things about the overtreatment of cancer is that Sometimes the tumor or lesion would never cause a symptom in the lifetime of that patient. Had they not gone to an early screening and used a fancy x-ray machine to see some type of suspicious growth and never been treated, they may live a far longer and healthier life. And that's the problem with overdiagnosis, is that they don't take that into account. They don't take into account that what they found and cut out or burned out would never have created a symptom and certainly would never have killed you. Think about that. Most people die of heart attack. They do not die from a benign lesion growing out of bounds and killing you. Now, if you live to be 180, yeah, it's probably likely it would start obstructing something, a physical growth, but it's not like a heart attack. And that's the problem again, is we need to start focusing on the actual reasons why we die, and it's not from a benign lesion growing and causing death. It's often from the overtreatment of those benign lesions and all the secondary side effects that occur. So here's one of the articles I reported on recently where there was a list in this review of natural substances, which include, of course, turmeric and curcumin, that target the cancer stem cells. And so this is a very powerful, powerful study, because some of the research, which I actually reference here, shows that there's up to 10 times greater selectivity. It's called selective cytotoxicity for these natural compounds, like one found in ginger, to target the cancer stem cell versus leaving the healthy tissue intact. That's the key, because again, from the conventional perspective, a tumor's a tumor. Any cells in there, they're just the same thing, blast and kill them all. And that is not what actually happens on a biological level. If you can target the cancer stem cell, which is what turmeric does, and curcumin, then you can get to the root of the cancer and theoretically just suppress it. Now, in some cases, you don't even need to, quote, kill the entire lesion or tumor. It's a matter of containment. And if, as long as the conditions in the microenvironment of that lesion around it, for example, stay stable or improve, then technically you are not going to see that particular growth lead to a lowered quality of life nor length of life. And so that's a whole other way of looking at cancer. So obviously, if we have within a plant like turmeric something that is safe, effective, affordable, as an alternative to conventional therapy, then there's going to be a lot of pushback, isn't there? People are not going to want to know this, as far as the big pharmaceutical companies. Big cancer wards and big hospitals are also not going to want to hear this. And it's going to be a real threat to the bottom line of probably $1 trillion plus industry. And unfortunately, that is what's happening. So let's see here. Okay. So one of the things that I think it's important for us to look at, I'm just going to move this slide ahead, is why, again, these natural interventions are not being used. And this is one of the articles I wrote recently on comparing all the literature I could find, human studies, on the benefits of curcumin or turmeric versus conventional drugs. And it was really eye-opening, because what you would find is that there are a number of very commonly used drugs that have really serious side effects that curcumin has been studied to have a very therapeutic equivalent or superior effect to. So what you're dealing with here is essentially something which threatens a massive industry. And what happens, unfortunately, is the very drug companies that pour billions of dollars into research on lead compounds inadvertently confirm the value and benefits of these substances for preventing and treating all these diseases. So let me show you the older version of Green Med Info. So you'll see here, this is our page on turmeric, which includes curcumin. We have 2,001 articles that have now been indexed for that page. And we have research now showing 758 diseases could theoretically be benefited by this natural compound. And if you look, let's see, 233 positive pharmacological actions. So obviously, anything with this much value is going to compete when it comes to the drug industry. Now also, we have ways of sorting the data. If we were to quickly sort by human study, I just want to show you, there really isn't that much. I mean, that's the problem. And why is that? Well, I think you're probably smart enough to assume why. But basically, Why that is, okay, is because, let's see how many pages of research. Oh gosh, yeah, maybe 6 pages out of hundreds of pages. Is because it takes a huge amount of money. Now, in order to get drug approval through the FDA, the paywall that you have to jump over to do phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials minimum is between 800 million to 11 billion. Can you imagine that? Okay, imagine anyone that's not going to be locked, they're going to be locked up in an insane unit if they were to state this to their shareholders, is going to invest private capital into confirming the value of something that has no patent that you can buy for literally pennies per gram, when they have drugs on the market today that literally cost 4,000 times more than gold by weight. So you have monoclonal antibodies approved by the FDA for melanoma that are $150 per milligram. For $150, you could probably buy 5 pounds of pure organic turmeric. Can you imagine that? That's per milligram. And this drug was never even placebo-controlled trial proven. So you can see what's going on here is that no one is going to be able to invest the money. And in this model that the FDA uses to orient itself around a Napoleonic construct, which is that if they don't say it's true or proved, the implication is everything that they haven't approved is not legal, is not true, is not valuable. And this is a sort of use of scientism as a political policy and a way to control, because the belief, of course, is you need double-blind, randomized clinical trials, placebo-controlled trials, to prove something valuable, even if the evidence of thousands of years of history or your own personal experience of remission in a disease has shown you that it works. It does not matter. You has to go through this elaborate, highly monetized process. Literally, we're talking about up to $11 billion has to be invested, and it has to be synthetic. So that's how all of this research actually came to be, is that massive data that I showed you exists really only because pharma wanted to investigate whether they could find a way to synthetically alter this substance. That's the primary reason why this research exists. So of course, Agreement Info, I thought, well, hey, you've literally sacrificed trillions of animals to obtain research like this. They've been suffering and they've been tortured. Their voices have not been heard. Let's go and find every single study and let's put it on a database and give each a number value. So if it's an animal study, 2 points, human, 8 points, and by the end of it, we'll be able to tell you how much compelling research there is. So say you're looking for an antioxidant, 206 articles in our database showing that this substance is good for that. Or inflammation, 80. Or breast cancer, 82. Colon cancer, 56. That's better than nothing, right? Or Alzheimer's, 35. That's pretty cool, because if you go into it, say you're diagnosed with a really bad disease and your doctor's saying, there's really only one thing you can do to treat this, and you're like, well, I've heard that there's some alternatives, I really can't afford this anyway, and there's there's no research to support that, just send them Agreement Info, and they'll say, well, there's only animal research, this doesn't prove anything. You know what? That's the beauty of healthcare for yourself, is you choose, you have the right to choose. But thankfully, there's research. I want to give you a quick example. Interleukin-6 downregulation. It sounds really fancy, right? Interleukins are these sort of hormone-like substances that are released, and some of them may increase inflammation, some of them may reduce them, and activate all types of genes and pathways. Well, we've indexed 42 studies on the ability of curcumin or turmeric to reduce or downregulate that hormone. And that's important because there are new syndromes that have been identified where all they know is that the people are suffering, they have no known cause, they're called idiopathic, all they can think of is throwing drugs, usually chemotherapy-like drugs or immunosuppressive drugs on them, and they know that the interleukin biomarker is elevated. Well, this gives you justification as a clinician, or say you're someone who's not even able to be part of that conversation and you have to take care of your own health care, then you have at least information at your disposal you can use to do that with. So, if it's so great, why doctors don't use it? Well, hopefully you know why now. And here's another reason, okay? This is a way to have compassion for conventional physicians, is that if they deviate from the standard of care and they have a patient that maybe just gets hurt or they naturally get sick and they sue the doctor, they are liable because they didn't follow the standard of care. So basically, it's pyramidal organization from the CDC down. In fact, they wear military-like uniforms at the CDC. If you don't follow orders, then you basically are putting yourself at risk. And that is the problem today, is that in the drug-based model of conventional medicine, there isn't any wiggle room, really. And those doctors courageous enough to take the step and say, you know what, you don't want to take this Vioxx or ibuprofen, you know what, go ahead and take turmeric. If they were to say that, they themselves would potentially be liable for promoting a non-FDA approved treatment, and that's something that could put them at serious liability, if not just simply being ostracized by their peers. It's very important to know. So here's the thing, is that turmeric is also one of the most compelling substances on the planet when it comes to its ability to help the brain. So this is one of the elements that people are not aware of. It's called aromatic turmerone. And it's something which is normally not found in any of the turmeric extracts out there, because as I said, curcumin is of course the primary focus. People think it's the magic bullet. And this particular component is something that you'll find in the whole herb. And it was found in a recent study, which is on our site Green Med Info, to stimulate the regeneration of the brain. Now, how does it do this? Again, it goes back to the stem cell. Now, cancer stem cells, of course, are the types of cells we're kind of a little wary of, right? We don't want those cells to continue to, spread out and cause more cancer growth, right? But the stem cells, ultimately, all of them in our body, come from the original germline cells contributed by your mother and father that were theoretically immortal because they came from at least 3.4 billion years ago, from the last universal common ancestor of all the living entities on this planet. And even the story that it suddenly appeared out of the, sort of primordial soup, the parts creating the whole with lightning stimulating it like Frankenstein, has been completely, I feel, devalidated by panspermia or evidence based on meteors and then finding organic biomolecules in the sort of the galactic space, that it's true that life was probably seeded here through that sort of introduction. So it's a fascinating question. But in order to, I just told you this to give you a greater appreciation for what stem cells truly are and their potential. So for quite some time in neurology, it was believed that the brain couldn't regenerate. You're sort of just stuck with the brain cells you have. I remember being in high school and they were saying, if you smoke pot, you're going to kill 10,000 brain cells per puff and you'll never get them back. Or same with alcohol, which is true as far as the damaging effects. But now we know that's not true. And there are stem cells in the brain that are capable of differentiating, that are relatively immortal, that in the right conditions, again, the right microenvironment with the right information, often conveyed through the right nutrients, they can stimulate differentiation, and so they divide, and you get a healthy stem cell, and you get a healthy daughter cell, okay? Or you can get two, there's asymmetrical, symmetrical division, so there's different ways this can pan out. But generally, in this study, aromatic turmerones were found to cause a differentiation of the stem cell into a new healthy daughter cell that could then act functionally. And this was an animal study, of course. It's hard to do any kind of research in a human because you can't crack open the human brain, quite frankly, and see what's going on. So it did seem to indicate that the sort of lore and the promise in ancient cultures like in India, where it's very apparent that just with broad epidemiological data, they have very low incidence of Alzheimer's, whereas they should have higher incidence, especially considering some of the extremely toxic situations they're exposed to. In fact, some of the areas are so polluted, by Western-type toxicants and, a lot of them from the industry there, that they should be dealing with a lot of the same rates of neurodegenerative disease as we are. But the reality is that some of the Indian culture there, because there's so many cultures in India, would use turmeric at the first breastfeeding. After a infant was born, a little turmeric would be dabbed on the nipple. So from the moment they're born, all throughout their lives, they're getting a significant amount of this compound, and they have extremely low rates of Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases relative to Western populations. So of course there are many factors here. But this study helped to kind of shed light on some of the other clinical studies that have come up recently, meaning that one study that I reported on Green Med Info found that within 90 minutes there was a significant regenerative effect as far as noticing changes in cognition and memory. And so in the case of those with dementia and Alzheimer's, it's possible that just incorporating a small amount of turmeric, especially the kind that can get in through into systemic circulation and then into the brain, could be enough to decelerate and potentially reverse some of the signs of aging in the brain. This is a profound finding because, as many of you know, there are very few, if any, therapies that are available and no drugs that are able to reverse the trajectory of neurodegeneration in states like Alzheimer's. There have been, I believe, over 300 clinical trials that have been performed on drugs, and none of them offered more than symptomatic relief, and I believe none of them, if you really look closely, show more than an equivalent to a placebo effect, because the placebo effect is very profound. If you're in a treatment clinical setting, the ritual itself and feeling like you're going to be cared for is significant. Just the feeling like, that it's meaningful for you to get better is enough to convey a therapeutic effect. So again, the whole plant, which contains aromatic turmeric, curcumin, and all these other components, may very well be better than the individual ingredient. Here's a brand that I've used in the past, Mega Food, and all this is a compressed turmeric. And so it has all of the theoretically information as well as the actual structural biomolecules in it still preserved. They're not using heat. It's just the whole plant. And if you look at the curcumin content, it's actually really not high. All right, so per 2 tablets, it says 480 milligrams of curcumin. Well, actually, it's higher than I thought. But the point is the whole plant is 700 milligrams, so very interesting. There are other ways, of course, to increase absorption. Remember, the brain is fat, it's lecithin, it's cholesterol. So we'll get into this topic when we move to that part of it. So I wanted to kind of do a brief overview so you get a real sense for the top conditions that turmeric has been studied for. We kind of went over that a little bit, but I think it's important for people to really see and also understand how the resources on Green Med Info work. Because if you were to go to the section here on turmeric, and you can get there. Actually, we'll go first to the dashboard so you can see. This actually lists, of all of the indexes on Green Med Info, the most compelling therapeutic substances, ailments and conditions as far as the amount of research that we've performed on them, problem substances, which include drugs and sort of chemotherapy and even food additives, therapeutic actions, they include yoga, etc., pharmacological actions, we went over, so we have a lot of data here. If you go to the 1,689 substances that I have indexed research on so far, we have 1,900 studies on turmeric. That's a lot, of course. In fact, I think it's even higher, as you saw. So we actually have that as a PDF download, and we offer our professional members access to the entire inventory, over $15,000 worth of these free PDFs. So again, the primary, most compelling applications are for very general states of the body which we know are linked to disease. Oxidative stress, which intrinsically is not a bad thing. In fact, some of the good compounds that actually confer benefits, like let's say resveratrol from grapes and even turmeric, can in some cases induce increased reactive oxygen species, which then activate pro-longevity pathways in the body. Now, why is that? Well, because in previous states of environmental stress or scarcity, our body would undergo sudden increases in increased stress and inflammation, and it had to find a way to compensate by learning how to activate pathways in the body that conserved energy, promoted stem cell longevity. And so basically it's never unilateral simple. Like we always love to say oxidative stress is bad, antioxidants are good. And it's not as simple as that, but generally speaking, oxidative stress can be downregulated very, very well with turmeric. And of course, in our database, if you go open any of these sections, you'll see that we have, okay, actually, I'll just go this way. We have research on literally hundreds of things that downregulate oxidative stress. So, here, I'll just go to this section this way. This will show you that we have probably hundreds of substances indexed on the topics. So turmeric, of course, is top of the list. Yeah, so 309 substances that have been studied for the ability to reduce oxidative stress. Curcumin, of course, number 1, resveratrol 2, vitamin D3. And so that's one thing, just a tip, so that when you're using the dashboard, you can get the data you want. And of course, inflammation, which kind of goes hand in hand. It's become a buzzword, and finally there's awareness that many disease states have characteristic to them upregulated states of inflammation, and this can be measured now through a variety of biomarkers. Like we said, interleukin 6 is a hormone-like substance. Cyclooxygenase is an enzyme that's commonly linked to upregulated cyclooxygenase 2 to upregulated inflammation. So turmeric is, of course, very good at that. Breast cancer, and now here's the real beauty of turmeric, is that if you were to look at all those diseases here on this page, I've taken the liberty on my site to really clarify this. There's over 100 different cancers that turmeric has been studied for. I mean, it's pretty amazing if you think about it. There's no drug, again, that we know of, no chemotherapy agent that is capable of any of them reducing cancer stem cells, for one. But for it to be able to even be successful and safe and effective and affordable in one cancer would be a miracle. And trust me, you'd be hearing about it through the global media. It'd be a $1 trillion blockbuster seller. And yet you have research here on potentially 100 different cancers benefiting. And so what is this about? This is something I'd really love to touch on real quick. Is it that, we know cancer isn't chemo and radiation deficiency, right? I mean, so in other words, why are we throwing chemo and radiation on top of something that intrinsically is not caused by a lack of it? Whereas we could say, theoretically, based on this research, that cancer could be a deficiency of something that's in turmeric. What is that thing or things? Is it just the biomolecule curcumin? Well, you're smart enough now to know that there are other components, aromatic turmerones for one, and hundreds of other compounds. Maybe it is the lack of these particular chemicals or phytochemicals or biomolecules. Or what if it is the information and intelligence and perhaps compassion embodied in the whole plant? And if we look at it through the lens of geologic time, when we look at the coevolution and sudden explosion of multicellular complex life on this planet, okay, the explosion of the metazoa, which occurred about, I think, 260 million years ago, correct me if I'm wrong out there, that's about the same time that the flowering plants that now produce 70% of the food on the planet came into their own and started to dominate the landscape. So animals, including humans, and these plants, the flowering plants, angiosperms, started to co-evolve. Turmeric is a flowering plant, beautiful plant. So over the time period of this sort of co-mingling and their destinies coming together, our bodies and animal bodies became dependent on certain compound categories, one of which is polyphenol categories. And curcumin is a polyphenol, resveratrol, catechin, a lot of these. And so what they found is it's also known as a xenohormetic effect. Small amounts of these chemicals or biomolecules are produced in plants, especially when they're stressed. Say there's environmental changes, they're stressed, they produce more as a defense. We eat them, we get conveyed the information and the same benefits, and then we activate all of these same pathways that promote longevity and are similar to caloric restriction pathways that promote longevity. So this could be an answer to why there's this incredible relationship. How could it be that turmeric or curcumin can treat and prevent and cure, because that's what the research is telling me. I'm not saying that you can do that without a doctor's help, right? Because that's illegal. But if the research is saying that, how could that be? Well, maybe because of co-evolutionary processes. And so it's a brilliant hypothesis. I didn't come up with it. There's people writing about it out there. You can Google xenohormetic and then type in curcumin. You'll find the study on PLOS, I believe. And then, of course, to me, the deeper relationship is information. Because information literally means put form into. And when we look at nutrition today and medicine, we focus almost exclusively on the physicality of the things that we take as a pill to make ourselves better. And we don't realize that theoretically, it's not the calories, the actual carbohydrates that are turned into sugar calories. It's not the building blocks, the actual protein, amino acids, and the lipids that, become part of our cell. It may not be the micronutrients either, the vitamins, the minerals. It could be the information contained within the food or plant that is conveyed to our body, which is, on an energetic level, a complementary union, really, of information and energy material. So there's this whole new way of looking at physiology that acknowledges that we are ourselves beings of information. Form has been put into us, and it's through different things that happens. One of them is potentially turmeric. Hopefully that wasn't too abstract. So, you got a bit of an overview here on some of the primary treatments that may in the future become part of the standard of care. Some of these are very common, others are not. Of course, depression, that's a really interesting one. I know Dr. Kelly Brogan has just published a book, in fact, about the inflammatory model of depression, and she references several studies that were performed over the past 2 years, one of which actually compared curcumin to Prozac, which has been a blockbuster serotonin reuptake inhibitor drug, which is fluoxetine, actually contains fluoride, which may explain why it's also causing a lot of sort of zombie-like effects, an affect and other side effects. And she shows that the reason may be for its positive effects that inflammation upregulation causes a snowball effect, which then leads to depression in some individuals. And she also normalizes the concept of depression because of something called sickness syndrome. If we're sick, we're inflamed, we're full of oxidative stress, we're not going to be happy, we're not going to have sex, we're not going to go out and eat and party and dance and sing and be really happy humans. We're probably going to want to stay at home, sleep, feel depressed, mope around, because we need to heal. And we haven't always honored that in us. Or maybe there's suppressed anger. Maybe there's suffering going on, and we're not dealing with those issues, which we would consider probably more of a psycho-spiritual type of conflict. This isn't New Age stuff. This is just you and I knowing what it means to be in a human in existential form with common everyday suffering as part of that. And then, of course, the psychiatric model, which is based on absolutely no objective confirmation of any organic disorder. There's no way to test that you have brain SSRI, needs. Like your serotonin deficiency concept is completely not evidence-based. And so that's fascinating that depression itself might be best treated and or prevented with turmeric. The one that I cannot overlook is one that I just love talking about because it was produced, a study by the American Diabetic Association's own journal, Diabetes Care. And what they found was that curcumin was extremely effective at preventing the development of type 2 diabetes from pre-diabetics. In fact, it was 100% effective. This is such an amazing study. I wish more people knew about it because, if it was from the Journal of Complementary Medicine, for example, which I think would be great, your doctors aren't going to necessarily look at that as being evidence-based, but take Diabetes Care, the very publication of the most powerful conventional diabetic association on the planet. They found 250 milligram capsules, taken for 9 months, were capable of preventing in 100% of those with prediabetes the onset of diabetes. In the control group, there was a significant increase in the progression. The details of which I don't really know here, somewhere in the study. But the point is that this is potentially a blockbuster solution, but you won't hear about it reported in the mainstream media because, again, you're going to see a lot of the competing drugs in that category being featured for reasons that are quite obvious to our highly educated readers. Okay, So, this is where I get to a point that I think needs to be made and may help break us into a new way of understanding herbs. And there are plenty of other folks out there that have done this, so I'm not the first to come to this conclusion. It's just interesting that I came through a very empirical, science-based path. I had no intention when starting my project of uncovering such an immense proof of the almost near miraculous benefits of a single plant. When you think of all the ailments on a database, I think we have something like 3,000 indexed. About 1 in every 4 human ailments that our body is capable of expressing, diseases, forms of suffering, can be alleviated theoretically with turmeric. So what does that mean? Okay, of course we talked about how turmeric has more than just information, it has intelligence. But compassion? Well, what's so interesting about this notion is that compassion literally means, the etymology means to suffer with. Passion, suffer, calm with. And what does that mean really on a basic sort of ecological level? You know, it means that if we have 2 species and they are in a reciprocally altruistic relationship where they have mutualism, commensal, they need each other, if one suffers or dies off, then the other could suffer or die off. And that's what happened with the angiosperms and the animals, is that the animals became a wonderful way to help to disseminate the seeds, and they got fruit in return. And then, of course, all these other compounds, information, these plants help to regulate their bodies. I mean, a good example of that's pomegranate, right? We'll talk about it in a little bit, but the ovary of the pomegranate plant is literally capable of replacing the human or animal ovary based on the presence of bioidentical hormones like testosterone and estrogen, as well as just the proof of it in the ovarectomy-induced model of menopause. So compassion then is woven into nutrition in the sense that if one particular species needs the other, then over time they end up with a dependency on a very specific level. So the polyphenol in curcumin now becomes essential for the health of the species, or polyphenols generally. So if your particular genotype or ethnic background had a specific type of polyphenol in your food or in your culture, then that was essential to help continue to regulate the DNA and its expression in your body for optimal health. So I find the image of the golden goddess and the lore, or actually you could call this another type of science or evidence of the turmeric being a goddess itself, to now be confirmed in the sense, and you could call it a god, you could call it a deity or divine intelligence or something to convey that there is a sort of beauty and kindness being conveyed. And this gets us to a different place, because imagine orienting yourself in a manner of gratitude towards the things you're consuming. What if you're just fear-based and you're like, oh my gosh, I read the latest article on Green Med Info or Natural News and I need to take this substance, or if I don't take this substance, I'm going to be at higher risk for this disease. And you're just like running around like a little rat because you just want to find something that's going to keep you from dying sooner. And the focus is your mortality, and fear is what's beneath it. What if you relax into the notion that it's not about taking mega dose pills or, about trying to get as many of these different superfoods or these, super spices that I read about on Green Med Info into your diet, but to understand that really the healing that's occurring in our body is our destiny, and that it is truly a miracle that we were all standing and healthy, or relatively, considering what we're exposed to daily. And then, maybe establishing a relationship with turmeric on a more culinary basis could be the answer. This is one of the principles that I advocate for, which is to understand that there's a heroic school of herbalism. Susan Weed actually helped me understand that. She's got this incredible mind when it comes to this topic. There's a heroic, almost male side of the equation. Take large doses. And this is what actually will happen if you wait to incorporate small amounts in enjoyable ways in your diet. And you wait, and then you end up with a type of cancer, and you're like, oh my gosh, the only thing that's going to work is turmeric. You take massive doses, and it may help, but it may even cure you, but it's just not the relationship you really want of desperation and a last chance. You want to start using these things in your daily life. You want to start incorporating them and see how they feel. And you may not even need them, because essentially it's the body that is always healing beneath the sort of show of medicine, even natural medicine. So I'd like to just sort of insert that concept into consciousness. And of course, a little bit more about the discussion on how to take it. So, for example, there's a new brand that I was recently given a sample of. It's called liposomal. And the concept, of course, again, is to try to get this extract of turmeric into a form that's going to get through the liver and then through tissues. And if our cells, right, have a fat-soluble membrane. So they have fat in the membrane. So obviously getting this into our cells is going to take a little bit of trickery. And so this is one way you could do it. Say you have, God forbid, a brain cancer, and you're looking for a way to get a turmeric into your brain. Well, of course, there's a way to try to get it through the liver and then get through the blood-brain barrier. Micronized, lecithinized, or phospholipid bound curcumin theoretically would be one way to do that. And of course, there are other ways to synergize with cannabinoids now freely available in the market. I wouldn't necessarily just take a singular approach. I would look at the evidence. And of course, on Green Med Info, we have a huge section on cancer research. In fact, I think we have something like 6,000 articles on 700 substances that have been shown. And then you can go and look just for glioblastoma, whatever particular brain cancer you have, and see what the research shows. So again, it's all about what tissue you're trying to target when you're looking at it through that lens. If you have, for example, a colon issue, it could be IBS or Crohn's or polyps in the colon or colorectal cancer, God forbid, then that's again another approach. I personally believe in that case, if it were me, I would take a whole turmeric extract or sort of spice and make a paste, maybe add some coconut oil, and just make a paste and consume it, and it will literally paint the entire alimentary canal down so that you will get the benefits on the surface of where you need it the most. So the goal, of course, there wouldn't be to get as much as you can through the liver, it would be to get it down through. Now there are those who believe, let's say if there's a tumor here in the pancreas and you take DMSO, it's a solvent of course, and add in a paste on top, one could theoretically get some of these compounds right into that area. So I'm not giving you this advice because I'm not legally able to, and of course this isn't what I do. I'm not a herbal oncologist or medical herbalist. So I'm just giving you some sense of using a bit of common sense with the topic. If you're just somebody who's looking to reduce inflammation, some of the really basic products, like even the one on the screen here, again, we have no relationship with these companies and are not endorsing them. I would highly suggest you always remember to go with organic and even better biodynamic, when possible, source. There's also what they call wild simulated, where they intentionally spread seeds in a wild area and let it grow and harvest it. And that's probably the closest thing you're going to get to wild crafted. Volcanic soil is also a really powerful consideration. So Costa Rica, Hawaii are wonderful places to source this material. And so ideally, this is one thing I did like a lot about New Chapter. Wasn't too happy about them being acquired by P&G, but Paul Schulich is a master herbalist who still deserves a lot of credit for creating that company and using his deep knowledge of herbalism to produce products that I think are really quite amazing still. He had the approach of taking water, fat, and carbon dioxide soluble parts of the plant out. So you had the full spectrum theoretically and concentrate it. With carbon dioxide extraction, known as supercritical extraction, they apply carbon dioxide at high pressure, low temperature, and it pulls out the entire chemistry in that range in a very natural way. And what I liked about it is it theoretically pulled out the information signature, which I think may be just as important. Dean Martins, who is the founder of Herbs of Light, also had that concept, which is that the energy of the plant guides the chemistries. So if you just are looking to pull out the chemistries using solvents, again, some use petrochemical solvents like hexane, that's not going to give you the energy, the intelligence, the embodiment of compassion that we were referring to. So that's one thing to consider, is quality, as of course you know this, always trumps quality. And certainly another way you can do it, is to do the turmeric milk approach, which is to take some coconut oil, coconut milk, and add in turmeric and maybe a little honey, boil it on the stove for a few minutes, and it's the combination of the fats and the other ingredients that help to make it into a sort of elixir. And that's one way that you can go about it for sure. Now here's the thing, is that we could talk really literally all day about turmeric. As you know, I've spent probably a good 1,000 hours just steeping myself in the turmeric literature alone. But the beauty of it is that what turmeric does for us is it just opens up a new perspective on herbs. It's sort of a new world where we start to appreciate them not just as things we're taking in, drug alternatives, but as organisms and as sacred parts of our sort of biological destiny if we embrace them and acknowledge their role. And so with pomegranate, we think a lot about health concerns like cancer today, and a lot of them are, I think, blown out of proportion when it comes to things like ductal carcinoma in situ, as we stated. But the reality is that heart disease is the number one cause of death for those who are likely watching this e-course. And pomegranate has been found. There was an Israeli clinical trial that was just so encouraging, but they looked at carotid artery stenosis. So you have in the artery, obviously, the lumen, which is the opening, and you have, the inside, which is the endothelium. It's just a one cell thick epithelium or epithelial cell lining like the intestine. And then in the middle region is called the media. And that's where you get the plaque buildup. So when you get infection and injury in the middle part of the blood vessel or artery, you start to see an accumulation of oxidized fats and inflammatory compounds, and white blood cells go in there to try to fix it, and they gobble up the debris and they explode, and it creates more of a mess. Well, one of the most fascinating clinical studies ever found that within a few months of administering to these patients just pomegranate juice extract, they saw a regression of the intimate media thickness to the point where there was a significant regression. We're talking 30% or higher after a year in some of the patients. And so this indicates that the number one cause of death, which is still treated as if it's an irreversible condition, can be reversed using pomegranate. And what's so compelling about this is that there are a number of ways in which it was able to affect a positive change. One of them is that even in the case where the regression of the thickness wasn't that significant, it reduced the what they call atherogenicity of that plaque, or prevented it from being destabilized. And that's what often happens when you introduce a very antioxidant-rich substance. The oxidation of LDL is actually what leads to it causing damage and being incorporated into the plaque. So when you can reduce the oxidative stress within the lipoproteins that are carrying a lot of the fats and cholesterol throughout your body, it actually prevents it from turning into a harmful vector. And that's the difference. When you look at the sheer numbers and quantities of lipoproteins, it's just this immense field that people are now realizing there's literally hundreds of different lipoproteins. So anyone who's telling you that they've figured out the ratio of apolipoprotein A and B, etc., it's really just the surface of the science, and we have to be humbled by knowing that we don't really know. But what we can say is that if you look at the quality of your blood lipid proteins and what's within them, then you'll find that that's sort of the answer. And so pomegranate does this, and another way it does this is that the plaque in the artery, if you were to culture it and look for certain viruses and bacteria, you would find in a good number of individuals the type of karyogenic bacteria that cause cavities, like Streptococcus mutans. You'd find herpes virus, like cytomegalovirus family viruses in the actual plaque, which helps explain why it's truly an autoimmune condition. Is the immune system tries to go in and fix, and it gets gummed up. Well, there are a number of reasons. Repeated injury, say you smoke every day and it's constantly getting injured, constant signal, come in here, send hormones in that cause regeneration and proliferation of that smooth muscle cell wall, and over time those messages just continue to accumulate new plaque. So pomegranate has the ability then to cancel this infectious component as well. Imagine that. Pomegranate looks like blood. Pomegranate's astringent. Epithelial tissues in your mouth. Take a little pomegranate, swish it around your mouth or drink it, and see what it does. It cleans and puckers up and makes tighter that tissue. Well, that's what it's doing to the tissue inside of your arteries, theoretically. So again, I can't say enough about pomegranate. Another way that it helps, of course, is the hormonal component. Is that the adrenal glands act as a backup ovary for women, and so as you reach the end of the ovarian reserve or near it, you get a lot of taxing of the adrenal glands. And so if you can disburden the adrenal glands, which are already stressed out, trying to deal with fight or flight situations, taking your progesterone that's remaining and turning it into cortisol, you can disburden that system theoretically by introducing a HRT alternative, which would be the pomegranate itself. Extremely promising when it comes to its ability to decelerate hormone-related bone loss and a lot of the menopausal symptoms that we associate with change of life. So the next one that I love talking about is flaxseed, and that's because it is so underappreciated, has so many culinary applications, is the perfect regulator of bowel movements, so from too much or too little, it's able to basically adapt to your needs and help produce a very soothing mucilaginous fiber. Depending on how you take it, of course, it's going to make all the difference. You don't just want to take lots of dry seed because that can bind you up. Usually you want to, you can steep it in water and drink it as a gel, for example, if you're looking to help with regularity. Just make sure to drink extra water when you do sprinkle it on your cereal or your salad, because it can go a long way in helping there. But the thing about flaxseed that's so powerful is its anti-cancer properties. It's actually been shown to cause regression in breast lesions and prostate lesions. They did pre-surgery interventions and then did surgery and they saw regressions. One of the ways it does this is it helps with hormone balance because it contains a category of estrogen modulating lignans. It's capable of blocking out very powerful synthetic and or endogenously produced estrogens like estradiol, and or stimulate the receptor in the case of deficiency. It's also selective insofar as it can target estrogen receptors in ways that modulate. So they're called SERMs, or selective estrogen receptor modulators. In nature, you find them very effective. The synthetic ones that pharma produce, like Arimidex, are not, and they cause a lot of side effects. So flax just is another one to know about when it comes to the healing power of nutrition. Right up there with turmeric. On Green Med Info, we have several articles, one of which, of course, is on over 70 reasons to eat turmeric. And of course, we can be a little hyperbolic about it because of all the research on our site that we've indexed and all the different studies reporting on its abilities to reduce cancer mortality by 70%, heal your arteries. I mean, there's just so much about food that we're learning is the holy grail of medicine as far as what the pharma industry's been trying to accomplish for many decades. Coconut. Coconut is, of course, par excellence, the meme of today's sort of nutritional movement, as far as it now supplanting even olive oil, I think, in popularity in the popular mind. And it has a lot to do with, many decades of suppressing the truth about the real benefits of saturated fats. Of course, saturated means that the double carbon bond that you see in polyunsaturated fats isn't available for oxygen to jump in and cause rancidity. And so saturation is actually a good word. We've learned over years to think of it as sort of a curse word, when in fact it's usually an indication of stability, especially if you like to cook. So if you fry an egg, don't do high heat because technically the smoke point isn't amazing. You just want to make sure that you keep it as an alternative to using polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fats, which do oxidize and shouldn't really be cooked with. So coconut is an alternative energy source. And we are so fixated on carbohydrate and so fixated on getting the glucose to the mitochondria to produce ATP, when in fact many believe today that the epidemic of neurodegenerative diseases, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, are a form of insulin resistance in the brain, or type 3 diabetes, because of being blasted with literally thousands of pounds of sugar throughout our lifetimes, when for most of our biological evolution we didn't even have sugar. I mean, rarely would we ever get such a simple source of carbohydrate, and then be fructose, which is a completely different animal, totally different information as well as far as the carbohydrate content. So coconut is offering us an alternative pathway to produce energy and to satisfy primarily the brain's energy needs. This massive thing on top of our torso that is unparalleled in its size and its energy hungry requirements needs ketone bodies to supplement its daily energy needs and to help prevent these fluctuations, because give the brain just less than 3 minutes of energy, basically if you deprive the brain of sugar, it starts to freak out, and then it releases a stress response, sort of like fight or flight, adrenaline, cortisol, and then increases your sugar, but exhausts you at the same time. Well, coconut, when consumed, contains medium chain triglycerides, which in the liver convert to ketone bodies, which can go right to the brain and then help provide energy, which explains why some who've used it for serious, memory issues see complete change within even 90 minutes. I mean, that's one of the studies we reported on. So coconut is definitely something I want you to look at. In fact, it's so cool because people are so afraid of saturated fat. Oh, it's going to make me fat. It's going to clog my arteries. And we know that extra virgin coconut oil is one of the best sources of antioxidants. It explains why it's protective of heart and cardiovascular disease, and why the extremely toxic and processed forms are not good for the heart. So I would definitely encourage you to get the best source, which is try to get one that's raw, or try to get one that's at least extra virgin, which means there shouldn't have been much heat, if any, used in its production. Garlic. Well, this is an article, again, we wrote that really might sound like hyperbole, but isn't, which is how garlic can save your life. And in this article, I go into the clear research indicating that it is one of the most powerful anti-infective agents on the planet. Now, of course, a lot of us already know this. This has been passed down by grandma and granddad and many cultures for many hundreds of years. In fact, I think the whole garlic around the neck and the vampire mythology is almost like the vampire represents germ theory's ultimate expression, and garlic is obviously incredible defense against things that are not just viral, but bacterial, fungal. And so this is really compelling, considering this is still one of the primary causes of death on the planet. Number 2 and number 1 actually are, of course, cancer and heart disease, and they're sort of neck to neck. So when you think about garlic's ability to retard and even reverse plaque buildup in the artery, and even calcified tissue in the artery, that was one of the discoveries in the literature that I made a while ago. It's pretty profound as far as its benefits. And then, of course, you have all of these different cancers that have been studied that have been shown to be helped by garlic. Now, again, I'd like to zoom out and point out something. Everything that you look at on Green Med Info is sort of like an amplification. We've concentrated the positive research. It makes it look like, oh my gosh, I should have been consuming this all my life. And you maybe have in small amounts. If you were to add a small amount of garlic and then add in a small amount of turmeric, imagine what the synergistic potential of the two are. So in other words, if we consume these in food quantities, smaller amounts, don't go crazy, sort of the heroic model, we might end up getting sort of geometrically more benefit than if we just focus on taking one supplement here, one supplement there, and then at the same time you're nourishing yourself. They always say take supplements with food, because they acknowledge it's the ultimate delivery form. So why don't we just make our food our supplement, is sort of my concept. Of course, the supplement industry doesn't like that, but then again, hopefully we're not beholden to them, despite those criticisms out there that anyone who advocates for these things is, in big supplement industry pockets or something like that. It's pretty funny. So basically, to wrap things up, I think turmeric is the most important herb on the planet. And of course, claims like that annoy me. Even the articles that I wrote when I first published them, they went viral, and I was like, really? Should I say that? And it's kind of true, because I think we need to introduce to people who are on the fence the idea that if the main criteria for the importance of something medically is the evidence, and that evidence says turmeric is the most validated, well then, you know what? It probably is the most important herb on the planet. And the beauty of it is that it's validated by the ancient traditions of this planet. So go back in history to Ayurveda, you'll find huge amounts of support for this idea. So I believe we're presently poised sort of at the beginning of a new era in medicine and nutrition and health, which is acknowledging that the mythos, the ancient knowledge, and the inheritance of that information that came through symbols and passed down orally or through the recipes of your grandmother or grandfather, and recipe, of course, means medical prescription, the French term from the 1500s, that's where RX comes from, then you know what? Then we are now entering an age where the science is saying that it is true. And so we can no longer just say, you know what, natural traditions or scientific ones are superior. We're going to see a complementarity where they support each other, sometimes negate each other, but ultimately the benefit is that we are all going to heal together. And so thank you so much for being part of this webinar. It's been a great pleasure, and I hope that we can do more of these in the future. Thank you so much.